Hello and welcome to the Medicine Show. This week I'm going to be talking about a familiar botanical substance that is used by just about everybody and not very familiar in a deeper way to all that many people around here. And that substance is chocolate. This is the chocolate that pretty much everybody would be familiar with. It is smooth and has a uniform texture throughout. It's very processed. It has a lot of sugar added to it, which makes it good tasting, but also probably not as good for you. And it is not very recognizable as being any part of any plant. If I pointed this out to somebody and referred to it as fruit, they would probably say, how in the world is that fruit? That's chocolate. It's something else entirely. So I want to talk a little bit about how chocolate gets to be like this. This is where chocolate begins. This is the fruit of a chocolate tree growing in a greenhouse in the Crone Conservatory in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's native to Central and South America, although today most of the world's commercial production comes from West Africa. The Latin name of this plant is Theobroma cacao. Theobroma means food of the gods because legend has it that it was discovered by the feathered serpent god and brought to people from inside the earth. And it is distantly related to other members of the mallow family like okra. So you can see that the seed pod, the cocoa pod, is set up roughly along the same type of shape as an okra seed pod. So this seed pod is split open, and from inside there are seeds encased in a white, slippery, fibrous substance. These are gathered together and allowed to ferment, and then the seeds are removed from the pulp. And these are the cocoa beans after the fermentation process. Up until this point in the process, production is mostly controlled by small family farms. The vast majority of it is. Some of it's grown on larger plantations. But at this point, the cocoa beans are sold to brokers who sell them to manufacturers who make them into the refined product that you're used to seeing in grocery stores in the richer parts of the world. And quite often, unless it's from some sort of fair trade program, the farmers get very little of the profit that is generated by the chocolate. And the vast majority of the cost of chocolate is going to the refiners, the manufacturers. So the cocoa beans are shattered into pieces like these, which are called cacao nibs. And then these are roasted and crushed up more and melted into something called chocolate liquor, which is then allowed to be hardened into a very rough form of chocolate. And this is sort of what I think of as medicinal grade chocolate. It doesn't contain any other ingredients. It's very strong, it's very bitter. And this is basically the chocolate that people were using for thousands of years in its native range and still using now as a food and as a hot beverage. From there, if someone wants it to be more processed, it can be melted and separated into cocoa butter, which is the fatty component of it, and defatted cocoa solids or cocoa powder, which is familiar to most people. And then those can be recombined to make a very smooth, processed, finished product, which is the chocolate that we were looking at before. And then often that has sugar added to it, but not always. So chocolate was known to the Mayans and the Aztecs and other people in its range from remote antiquity, from the beginning of their existence. And it was introduced into Europe in the 1500s by delegates from the Mayan civilization who visited the Spanish imperial court. They were introduced to the Spanish imperial court by the Dominican order, who were a powerful religious order in Spain at the time. And up until then, some Spanish travelers had known of the existence of cocoa beans, but it had never really become a popular thing in Europe. And I imagine that the delegates knew how to fix it properly or something like that. But for whatever reason, at that time it changed. It became a very in thing among the upper class in Spain, and then among royalty and upper class throughout Europe, and eventually it filtered down to the less rich people. But at that point, it was a product of imperialism. It was Spanish people who were basically taking advantage of and exploiting the people who they had militarily occupied in the New World, and bringing the cocoa back to Europe as a luxury good where it could be sold for a lot of money. So one thing that people noticed about this substance was that it made them feel better. And they didn't even have to have anything particularly wrong with them for it to make them feel better. So that's why to the Maya and the Aztecs, it was considered a gift from the gods. And that's also why it became such a popular food and remains such a popular food throughout the world now. It's because when people eat it, it makes them feel better. It's uplifting to the spirits in very non-specific ways. It doesn't have an intoxicant effect the way that, say, tobacco does. But it does have a cheering and uplifting effect. You know, makes people mildly more awake, but not really quite the way that coffee does. It helps with, if it's in its bitter form, it helps with stomach troubles and things like that, digestive system issues. And so it's been, you know, very much, for most of its history, thought of as a very healthy thing. And then people started associating it with junk food, mostly because of the sugar content. But in recent decades, there's been quite a bit of research on the health benefits of especially dark chocolate. And so the prejudices of Western science are such that when they want to look at something that a plant does, people will often start looking for a bitter substance, an alkaloid, in that plant that is not widely found in other plants. And they think that that is the active constituent, like that's the plant that makes it, that's the substance that makes it do what it does. And that is a terribly oversimplified version of the story. But it's not entirely incorrect either. There are substances in plants that help them to do the things that they do. And I will talk a little bit more about that. This is the substance theobromine. It is a molecule consisting of 2 rings of carbon atoms, one shaped like a hexagon and one shaped like a pentagon. And then there are some places where there are nitrogens instead of carbons, and then there's some other stuff stuck on around the outside. So people would sometimes think of this as being a molecule of chocolate. It's called theobromine. The "ine" means that it's an alkaloid, and the theobroma part is the name of the plant. But in fact, it is one of a group of closely related substances called methylxanthines. So this one is theobromine, and this one is theophylline, which is also found in tea, and this one is caffeine, which is also found in coffee and also in tea. And you can see they look very similar. The only differences between them are these little groups right here. This is CH3, which I've stylized as a steamy beverage. Theobromine has 2 of them. Theophylline has 2 in different places, and caffeine has 3 of them, encompassing both the places where they are in the theobromine and in the theophylline. And as a group, these are called methylxanthines, and they are responsible for the stimulant effects of chocolate. They also have anti-inflammatory properties and positive effects on the flow of air into the body. They reduce constriction and inflammation and reactivity in the lungs. All three of them do that, and all three of them increase production of adrenaline and increase movement of energy in the body, so to speak. They make you feel more energetic. They also stimulate the liver because they're bitter and have a mild laxative effect if you take enough of them. So those are some of the main substances that are in chocolate, but there's more. This is actually a catalog of all different substances that are in chocolate. And there are about well over 100 of them that we know of. And some of them are antioxidants. Some of them are similar to the antioxidants that are found in green tea, catechins. There's also valeric acid, which is a sedative. It's closely related to the seizure drug valproic acid, which would be called propylvaleric acid if you use the same naming conventions. And so it's not just a matter of one substances or three substances. It's dozens, maybe hundreds of different substances. It's also just sort of the aesthetics of the plant, the way it tastes, the way it feels to be eating chocolate, and so forth. All of these things combine to create an uplifting effect that goes from, you know, the level of consciousness to the level of neurotransmitters to the larger level of movement of bodily fluids like breath and bile. And all of those things are working together to make you feel better when you eat chocolate, make you feel more uplifted. And so that is a fuller version of the story of why chocolate makes people feel better. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you will get your chocolate from sources that support small family farms rather than neo-colonial power structures. And if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like, share, follow, subscribe, and tell your friends. And I will see you next time on The Medicine Show. Thanks a lot.